Welcome back to the 2018 Political Forum, sponsored by KDBM-KBEV. We're in the second part of the program tonight, where we're going to hear from candidates for Beaverhead County Sheriff. Paul Kluser II. Paul Kluser.
You do that.
Did I do that?
You did that.
Frank Kluser II. And Paul Kraft. Go back over some rules to begin with. In this case, we have some questions that are directed to both of them and some that are directed to each of them in a separate format. So that format is that the candidate to whom the question is specifically directed will have 2 minutes to answer. The other candidates may have a 1-minute rebuttal, and that's for a specific question for a specific candidate. The general questions will still be answered the same way. You'll have 2 minutes, each of you, to answer those questions as they come up. And so to deviate a little bit from the way we started the last one, we're going to start this one by letting each candidate give a 3-minute opening statement. And so take it away. You guys can choose who's going first.
Go ahead.
All right.
Thank you, Paul.
Frank Kluser will begin.
Thanks, John. And well, thanks for having this opportunity to talk directly to the voters and answer any questions that they might have. Again, I'm Frank Kluser. I grew up in Lima. I was born here in Dillon, and Beaverhead County's been my home. It's a very special place to me. It's a great place to live, and I've been privileged to be the sheriff for the last 4 years. It's been quite an honor. I grew up in Lima. It's a small town, so I learned small town values, small town ways, and I understand how a rural county works. I had the opportunity to work out in Wisdom as a resident deputy in the 90s, and then I did over 15 years as a Dillon police officer, so I have a variety of experiences. Prior to getting into law enforcement, I got some experience with the Lima Rural Fire Department, became an emergency medical technician, and I worked for the, back then it was called State Lands, but now it's the NRC as a firefighter, to get some experience before going into the Montana Law Enforcement Academy in the pre-service program. Law enforcement became kind of an interest of mine that I had when I was in college, and it's a calling for me. I mean, you really have to be called to do this, to be dedicated to do it. So law enforcement's not an easy job. It's not an easy job for anybody, but it is rewarding in its own special ways. I've been very fortunate to be able to serve on, well, the board of directors for the Southwestern Montana Drug Task Force. That was something that was in my mind that we needed to address, not just locally but nationally, the methamphetamine crisis and the opiate crisis. And I think we've done a very good job of that in the last 4 years to combat some of those things when working with the task forces in it, locally and such. We do have a very low crime rate here in Beaverhead County, and I want to keep doing and continuing to do the things that work, and just reevaluating what we need to change or what we need to do, and just work our best to keep this a great, safe place. I raised my 3 daughters here in Dillon. They're all adults now. Dillon's a wonderful place, a great school system, and we have opportunities to work with the schools a lot and the university. something that I've really focused on is mental health, and a philosophy that I do have is that a strong community is built by strengthening the individuals. You can go out to all the state meetings and have the best programs in the world, but we're stronger collectively just on the individual level. That the stronger the person is, the stronger the community is. So again, I'm just happy to be here and happy to answer questions and help you all be informed.
Okay, Paul, your turn.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, both in person and on the radio. And special thanks to KDBM-KBEV for putting on the event and the Depot for hosting it. My wife and I joined or moved to Dillon in 1983. And at that time I was working for Paul's Motor Company. I excelled in mechanics. I was Dillon's first ASE certified technician, and a few years later, I was the General Motors master technician. In 1990, I joined the reserve program with the city, and in '92, I loved law enforcement so much that I quit my job at Paul's Motor Company and became a full-time officer. I served with the Dillon Police Department for nearly 25 years and spent most of that in supervisory positions, 13 years as the assistant chief, 7 years as the chief, until my retirement in 2016. I understand what it takes to operate a law enforcement agency, and I understand the difficulties that Beaver County faces with such a large area to protect. In my tenure with the Dillon Police Department, I had an excellent record in being able to work with the individuals within the agencies as well as other entities. And I think it's been clear from what's in the news lately that there are some working relationships between the Sheriff's Office, the County Attorney, and the County Commissioners. And I've also been advised that these same difficulties exist between the Sheriff's Department and the Dillon Police Department. In my role as chief, I worked successfully with the Dillon City Council, the mayor, and the city attorney. I've also worked with the county commissioners on several projects as the chief. I helped the County Emergency Disaster Service successfully obtain the Homeland Security grant for our new early warning system and siren. I also worked with the Masons to help them get their AED program off the ground. We put out 10 AEDs with that program, and I'm very proud of that. I would like to go into the Sheriff's Department and make a difference in the community. I think there needs to be some change there, and I would be willing to put my best foot forward and make those changes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. These are the general questions that will be asked both candidates. We will rotate back and forth. And since Frankie started with introductions, we'll start with Paul on the first question. Do you think there should be any changes, Paul, in deputy deployment in the county?
Changes in deputy deployment? Absolutely, absolutely. Taxes and revenue are something that needs to be looked at when you're dealing with putting deputies out there. You've got to pay for their wages, and you've got to pay for their vehicles, their service. But yeah, there needs to be some type of set standard for putting a deputy out in the county, like Lyman, or even in the Big Hole area. And if that deputy's not available, maybe it's time that the city officer, the local deputy, step up and go out there when that deputy has to come in for stuff like reports or courts or things like that. I think there needs to be more coverage in the county. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, direct that same question to you, Frank.
Great, thank you, John. Well, maybe the best way to answer this question is to explain kind of how it works now. And I draw this on my experience of covering areas in Lima and the Big Hole and Wisdom, Wise River, and then being a Dillon deputy as well, and now being the sheriff. So our coverage area is approaching about 5,700 square miles. That's huge. And in general, there's generally just one person on in the evenings, sometimes two if a resident deputy is scheduled. And maybe I should start with what a resident deputy is. A resident deputy is a deputy that specifically stationed and lives in an area. We have one that lives in the Lima area. We have one that lives in the Big Hole area between Jackson and Lisbon. I think it's really important that we keep those resident deputies in those areas because they learn the area. They know who lives in what lane. They know, what's going on when we have issues, and they're our go-to people for those areas to get an idea of what's going on, just by community need-wise, crime-wise, such. So what I've done was I added staffing. I got a grant, a COPS grant, one of 3 agencies in Montana last year to get that, to try to increase that staffing. And I added that position in the Dillon office so that we could supplement patrols in the smaller communities. We have 11 other small communities besides Dillon in the county, and a lot of rural schools. And my intent was to, when we could double up shifts in Dillon, send them out to those areas. But the major amount of calls we get are in Dillon, and they are on the Interstate 15, just because of the amount of traffic and people that go through there. So, I see that I'm running low on time here, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about this issue and some of the other questions. But it's a big county, and deploying resources is a challenge, and we just have to be prepared, because everyone on shift has to understand that you could go anywhere in that nearly 5,700 square miles.
All right, thank you. Rotating the question, Frank, you're first on this question. Has there been significant turnover in the Sheriff's Department? If so, what are the reasons?
There has been turnover in the Sheriff's Office, and there are a lot of reasons for this. Nationally, recruitment and retention is a struggle in law enforcement. Some of those reasons that are listed, I read an article earlier today, are pay. Pay is a big one. Some of those things are, we've tried to address with salary increases. And again, we just listened to a couple legislatures, and we got a pretty good lesson on budgets and such, but there's only so much pie, and you can only increase wages so much. And I've advocated and I've supported that, but in turn, it's kind of squeezed out some of the budget and other resources. So, and I appreciate all that has been done by the commissioners and that to help with wages. So there have been about a $3 increase for most of the employees that work for the Sheriff's Office since I've been a sheriff. The nature of the job is tough. It's a very, very high stress job. And so what I've been seeing is that, the dispatch and the patrol have been very stable, but we have detention officers. So there's 3 departments that the sheriff manages. And those detention officers, generally in our hiring pools, they're looking for a way as a stepping stone to get in, a permanent law enforcement job where they're sworn and on the streets. And I can't blame them for professional advancement, but that's where we've had most of the turnover. And I expect that to kind of continue because it seems to be an institutional problem.
All right, thank you. Paul Krabs, same question.
Yes, there seems to be some discrepancy as to just exactly how many turnovers there actually is. Frank says in the paper this morning that there were 9 turnovers. The office of the county courthouse says that there's been 22. But nonetheless, there have been a lot of turnovers, and in the small departments there are a lot of turnovers because of that stepping stone effect. And the legislature saw fit to give us some tools to do that with. By, in law enforcement, we can have them sign a contract to stay 3 years with us, and they prorate that if they leave. But one of the things that makes a difference, like Frank says, is wages. Another is respect. You've got to respect your employees, and your employees need to respect you. There needs to be some mutual respect there in order to make somebody happy in their job and to allow them to function freely. Training is another issue that, again, it has some costs associated with it. And every time you lose an employee, the training costs go up. Those could be used to further advance training of long-term employees. So yes, there has been, and there are ways, I believe, to change that.
Okay. And question rotates to you, Paul, being first on the next one. Has bullying been a problem in the department? If so, how has it been addressed?
I think that there has been some bullying in the department, and as far as how has it been addressed, I don't know. I can't answer that question because everything within the sheriff's department is done behind closed doors, and there are some confidentiality issues with the employees and dealing with those types of issues. So that basically can't be released to the public unless the employee that's affected signs a waiver to allow that stuff to be out in the public, and we've only had one of those do that recently.
Okay. Frank, your question?
Is there bullying in the department?
Has bullying been a problem in the department? If so, how has it been addressed?
Well, I'll tell you that law enforcement's a type A business, and bullying is addressed in this way. I expect law enforcement officers to have 4 basic qualities, because they need to have respect. They need to have respect for themselves, respect for the public, respect for their co-workers, and respect for the agency and the supervision that's in there. So it's very rare that we've really had real direct bullying, and if there are those things that happen, I try to be out in front of it. One of the things I did was I put some responsibility on the supervisors, on the sergeant levels or the jail commander positions or that, to kind of mediate those things within that level. And that chain of command is real important, so that folks can have that area to work out the problems when they're under stress or stuff, things like that. So I've addressed a lot of programs, and Paul's right that a lot of things have to be done employee-wise behind closed doors. There are some things that I've done, like performance improvement plans, where we've counseled with employees and things like that. It's been effective. It's been effective for most. I would say it's the exception when it's not, just to point those things out. There's a psychiatrist called Dr. Gilmore. He was a detective, I believe, with Phoenix, and now he speaks worldwide after he got his PhD in psychiatry. And he talks about emotional intelligence and about how you need to approach those stresses and how you cope. So, I don't see bullying as a problem that's any different than it would be in any law enforcement institution. And I've taken a lot of steps that I can to understand that, and so that I can support those employees that we do have.
Okay, thank you. Next question rotates to Frank to begin the first answer. What is the most pressing law enforcement issue in the county?
The most pressing law enforcement issue? Well, it's really hard to quantify that as most pressing. I would say being in the sheriff's office is a lot about what's happening seasonally, and it's triage. You come to work and you wonder what you're going to do. This morning I come to work, I'm out doing traffic control for a semi that's wrecked, and we've got to get it across the interstate. We end up with a car on a bridge by Oneida. You just never know. So the pressing thing for the sheriff's office is to, just maintain the entire security and safety of the whole county. Whether you're dealing with jail overcrowding, or you're dealing with a snowstorm and wrecks on the interstate, or you're dealing with a wildfire, you just need to be prepared. There are some issues that are priorities when you start seeing those happening in the community. Say for instance, if we started to see drug overdose deaths in the ER, we would want to do what we could to task ourselves to solve that problem. And it goes back to my philosophy of community-oriented policing, and it's problem-based. It's based on what is the problem that's presenting, and then what steps are you going to take? What are you going to do to try to address that problem? And so you do it by, first identifying it, and identifying how are we going to address it? Do we need training? Do we need, what resources do we need to put there? Do we need help from other entities in that? So there's a lot of tools in our toolkit that we do to address all problems. So I would have to say that the role of a sheriff in the sheriff's office is to just be prepared and be available for whatever happens at any time within our large county.
Okay. Paul Kraft.
I'm going to assume that question is directed at Beaver County, and at this point, my concerns are ethics. Normally, I would say that we probably have a drug problem that needs to be handled, but I think our